on this web platform, online platform, to have some discussions on the Indian theatre tradition, Indian drama tradition. The topic for discussion today will be mainly on the historiography of Indian drama in English and in English translation. And I shall be referring to the historiography of Indian drama in English and in English translation. But unlike a chronological historiography, my discussion will be more on the evolution of the drama, how the Indian drama gradually developed in the Indian context. Therefore, I shall be focusing on the impact of the Western dramaturgy on the Indian dramatic tradition and the evolution of the Indian drama tradition that we call the modern Indian drama. So with the departure of the British colonists, European colonists from India, we find that the fascination for something European remained at large, especially in the artistic tradition. In the field of drama, the impact of the West was so strong that even with the evolution of the cinema, the impact of the West was so strong that the performance tradition, especially the performance on the stage, performance for the celluloid, could not get itself separated from the Western tradition. The modern Indian drama is essentially Western in conception, Western in form, although the subject matter of Indian drama is of course Indian. Even while the adaptations of the European plays are there in the Indian context, we find the same obsession with the Indian themes in such adaptations of the Western plays. By Western, I would first primarily mean the English, and then I shall be talking about the European impact as well as the American impact on the evolution of Indian dramatic tradition. Almost all over India, different forms of plays existed for so many years, thousands and thousands of years, forms of performance existed. But because of the impact, all invasive impact of the colonialism, we find that the tradition of drama turned towards the Western theatre. Dr. Sarkar has classified Indian drama into three types. The first theatre he talks about is that of the folkloric traditions that are even present today. And in such folkloric tradition, there is an element of ritual. So from ritual to drama and the folkloric tradition, we have the first theatre. Dr. Sarkar talked about the second theatre as a theatre of importation. Anything that has been derived or taken, imported from the West is called the proscenium theatre. And that proscenium theatre, the theatre that is performed in a theatre house on a stage, on a proscenium stage, on an elevated platform stage, is called the second theatre by Dr. Sarkar. The third form of theatre Dr. Sarkar talks about is that of alternative theatre. That is, rejecting the conventions of the proscenium stage, the theatre house and the expensive dramaturgy. Even Rabindranath Tagore in his famous essay, Rangamancho, said that the Indian theatre tradition that has its rich root in the classical tradition of Natya Shastra can develop into independent indigenous form of theatre. But if it depends on the Western dramaturgy, the heaviness, the richness, and the expensive nature of the Western theatre will make the Indian theatre collapse. And with this view, of course, Rabindranath Tagore was experimenting a lot of new types of plays that was outside the proscenium theatre. So even in a palong, in the house, in the chowki of a house, a play can be performed. Even in the veranda, a play can be performed. A play can be performed in the courtyard. That was Tagore's view of theatre. So Tagore in Rangamancho said that the Western theatre is very artificial, mechanical, and requires a lot of machinery. And without that machinery, that is expensive, the theatre is not possible. But Indian theatre of the first type, the folkloric theatre, although it also includes abhinaya as a form, and abhinaya includes elaborate costuming, elaborate gesturing or angikas, required the sattvikas, okay, gestures, the rasas, and the bhavas in the presentation. Yet, these were minimalist form of performance. Everything depended on the performer. With a few musical instruments, the performer can perform the plays. And that tradition was very close to the aspirations, the anxieties, the life condition of the ordinary people. Even the mythical tales or the legends that were performed in the folkloric form of performances like Gombhira, Cho, or say the artistic form of court theaters like the Bharatnatyam or Kathakali. So we have this kind of artistic representation of reality without the heaviness of the commercial theater of the West. Bahadur Sarkar talks about this commercialization of the theater or the act of performance because of the mode of production into which the Indian society was pushed because of the British colonialism. But whatever the historical background might be, we can come to this conclusion that this Indian theater post-independence had taken two courses. One, in order to search for the traditional roots, Indian theater became the theater of roots, trying to search in the folkloric tradition the possibility of modern Indian drama. In some way it has succeeded, in some way it has failed. The other is a close imitation of the Western form of performance. The form is Western, the structure is Western, and the content is made Indian. So these are the two broad ways on which we find that Indian drama is gradually pursuing its course. In the context of Indian drama, especially the modern Indian drama of the post-1960s, 1947, we have that influence of so many great European writers and thinkers, European plays and theories, especially the theories of Aristotle related to drama, the theories of modern theoreticians of theater like Bertolt Brecht, Antonin Artaud, A-R-T-A-U-D, Artaud, Antonin Artaud. These have all come into Indian theater. So we have the development of theater around the colonial centers of India, and even after the independence, we find centers like Mumbai, the Mumbai Presidency, Bombay Presidency, Kolkata or the Calcutta Presidency, Madras, modern-day Chennai, even Bangalore. So between 1947 and 2020, we find the development of theater tradition. Even Delhi. Delhi has even the drama school, National School of Drama, around which the development of Indian drama took place. So we have famous plays that are written in close imitation of the Western theater, like Vijay Tendulkar's Santata Court Chalu Ahe, that was produced in 1968 and later on translated by Adarkar. Priya Adarkar translated the play as Silence the Court is in Session in English. We also have plays like Aurangzeb by Indira Parthasarathi, also performed as a proscenium play, but takes some traditions of the classical Indian dramaturgy, especially in the performance. Plays of Bahadur Sarkar. So Bahadur Sarkar started his plays in the proscenium conventional Western theatre style and then abandoned the proscenium theatre for alternative theatres. So Ebong Indrajit in 1962 was written primarily for the
Ebong Indrajit.
Ebong Indrajit was primarily written for the proscenium theatre, and later on it was also performed in non-proscenium space. Mitchell 1972, another famous work by Bahadur Sarkar, is meant for the alternative space. It can be performed in the garden. So Karjan Park usually had seen in the 1970s the performance of Mitchell. Even today, when the Shatabdi Natyagosti, they are performing plays, the performers are performing in the alternative spaces. They're not performing on the proscenium stage. So when they come to our college to perform, or when they conduct the workshop, they simply use the floor of the classroom or the hall to make their performances and productions. We also have Indian English playwrights like Asim Kurumboy. So he's also blending the two traditions, the Indian theatre tradition with classical dance forms that are derived from the Indian tradition. For example, the Dam Dancer. Dam Dancer contains the character of a Kathakali dancer. So there he has used the classical Indian dramaturgy with the modern European dramaturgy. Although Asif Kurumboy's other plays are more realistic plays like Refugee, that has to be presented as a naturalistic play. Great writers like Mohan Rakesh, Hindi playwright, his play Asar Ka Ek Din, One Day in the Month of Asara, or Adhe Adhure, The Halfway House. These are naturalistic theatre, psychological plays. They are suitable for the proscenium theatre, rectangular box-like, room-like stage. On the other hand, we have Habib Tanvir. You must have heard the name of the famous theatre director, Habib Tanvir. Habib Tanvir had his own Naya theatre, and his plays were produced for the proscenium, but could be produced as the folkloric theatres, especially Charandas Chor. Charandas Chor can be performed in any space. Okay, although it has mainly performed on the proscenium stage. So we have Charandas the Thief, 1975 the play was produced. Another major playwright is Girish Karnad. You must have heard the name of Girish Karnad. Girish Karnad is the writer of so many plays. Recently he died and left with us a large number of plays that are more suitable for the performance in the proscenium. Plays like Hayavadana, The Fire and the Rain, even Tughlaq. So these plays contain the Western theatrical tradition and blend that with the Indian forms of performance. Mahesh Dattani is an Anglophonic writer, means writes in English. And in his play, we have the use of the Western naturalistic theatre tradition, while he combines psychological theatre with naturalism, symbolism. We find that his theatre are mainly proscenium theatre. So his 7 Steps Around Fire, or even Tara that you have read, Bravely for the Queen, these are all plays that are suitable for the proscenium theatre. So we have a complex relationship of the development of drama in the Indian context, especially the drama that came under the impact of the Western dramaturgy, Aristotle's Poetics, and the plays that were performed in England from, say, 1560 onwards, and the plays of Europe, especially the 20th century plays of Europe. All these came into India. In the early phase of the colonial rule, the traveling players used to come to India along with the merchant ships, and they used to stay in India in the colonial centers like Bombay, Kolkata, or Madras. And these traveling players used to perform plays. Gradually, by the end of 17th century, we find that some of the players have settled down in the mainland India, and they are performing for the local audience. So in the British theatre tradition, colonial British theatre tradition, we have the regimental theatre as a form, regimental theatre. So in the regiments of East India Company, we have the first examples of the theatre performances, and usually these performances were done by the officers, the British European officers, and their wives. They used to participate in these amateurish performances. By the beginning of 19th century, we find that so many theatre houses have been established in and around Calcutta. So Damdam had a theatre house, Kolkata we had Chorongi theatre house, then we have the Sanssouci theatre house in Kolkata. Several theatre houses gradually developed. By the end of 18th century and the early 19th century, we have a rich tradition. These, of course, were European theatre houses, where European plays were performed by the European actors. Gradually, Indians also started participating in such ventures. And by the mid-19th century, we have seen that Indian writers are also writing or adapting plays for the European stage, Kolkata-centric European stage. There is a complex relationship between the development of post-1947 Indian drama and the drama of the West. So it is a love-hate relationship. While the major focus of these playwrights has been to comment on the contemporary issues, even while taking up the historical subjects or legendary subjects, the main focus of the writers has been to comment on the contemporary issues that are essentially Indians. So Indian contemporary issues are presented on the stage with the help of a vehicle of theatre that is essentially Western in conception, in form, in dramaturgy. As because the exchange of money in the commercial theatre, or the absence of professionalism in case of amateurish theatre, led to a kind of development of theatre that is not proper in the Indian context. So on the one hand, the commercial theatre, because of its expenses, failed. On the other hand, amateurish theater, because of its non-professionalism, gradually failed. These theaters gradually gave rise to group theater movements all over India. Several small groups came together, groups of actors, playwrights, musicians, stage managers, stage makers. Okay, they all came together in order to create some groups. And the group theater movement, working as a cooperative, became very popular all over India. And these group theaters did produce some of the best plays that we have in our repertoire of Indian theater. These group theaters also experimented a lot with the conventional theaters because they were not trapped by the money that the commercial Western theater always asked for. So there was no trapping of such money or the compulsion for commercial success to carry on the work. Furthermore, the state subsidy in case of Indian theater was in practice since independence, especially because of the IPTA movement that had its roots in the independence struggle. So anti-colonial struggle also developed along with the IPTA movement, in Indian People Theatre Association movement. And because of that, after independence, the theatre and performances, these were always taken to be public forms of mass communication, dissemination of ideas, of thought, of ideologies through the stage performances. And definitely the state subsidized such performances by allowing these players to perform in the theatre houses that were becoming possible after the independence, accessible to the common masses. Some of these theatre shows were, of course, ticketed shows. And when the burden of the money or the economics of theatre became problematic for the performers, some of them opted to liberate theatre from the tyranny of commercial success. So commercial success also regulates the content of the theatre. For example, Dr Sarkar rejected the exchange of money, commercial theatre, and talked about a theatre that is mobile, that is flexible, that is accessible, that can reach to the corners of India without having the burden of expenses. So it is a cost-effective, professional artistic theatre that Dr Sarkar produced in his plays of the 1970s. So in such development of Indian plays, we have often seen the impact of the Western theories of drama, especially the 20th century theories of drama. The theories of great theoreticians like Bertolt Brecht, Erwin Piscator, Georgi Grotowski, Peter Brook, Richard Schechner, all these come together in the making and shaping of Indian theatre. The plays of great European practitioners of theatre, these are also very popular in the Indian context, like the plays of George Bernard Shaw, the plays of Henrik Ibsen, John Galsworthy, the plays of American playwrights like Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams. So these are all very successful, and Shakespeare has remained as an all-time popular hit among the practitioners of Indian theatre. Shakespearean theatre, of course, gradually created that particular space for the Indian writers to explore the traditional Indian dramatic tradition like Jatra, like Nautanki, like Tamasha, and appropriate that Indian form or indigenous form of theatre and performance to the Western forms. Elizabethan theatre tradition was much more closer to the post-independence Indian theatre conventions, and thus this appropriation became more easy and possible. Kapila Vastayan, while talking about the development of Indian theatre, the development of Indian theatre's renewed interest in the theatre roots, says that this return back to the roots in search for the folkloric traditions to present a kind of ritualistic form of theatre that is accessible to the common man, common human beings, is also influenced by the works of Arthur Brecht, Grotowski, because they also search for the Eastern traditions. Even in these European playwrights, we have seen that the dramaturgy often takes into account the Eastern dramatic performances. Especially in the works of Brecht, we find the influence of the Chinese, Japanese theatre tradition. In the works of Grotowski, we find the influence of Kathakali tradition. In the works of Peter Brook adapted Mahabharata. In the works of Peter Brook, we find the influence of the African forms of performance. In the works of contemporary writer like Brecht, we find the influence of the Indian forms of performance, especially the episodic forms of performances. So such interest that got renewed also was because of the presence of the European forms that became accessible to the Indian audience. So Indian audience has the advantage of seeing the plays in translation. They could see the plays in translation. Say a play like Ibsen's A Doll's House. A Doll's House, translated into English, must have influenced a play like Silence, the Court is in Session. Okay, must have influenced, because there also we have a woman trapped. Nora Helmer is trapped in the patriarchal society. Here we have Lila Banare trapped in the violent patriarchal society. Suresh Avasthi, a great critic of Indian drama, says that the impact of European drama is insignificant. So this comment is also very interesting, because Suresh Avasthi was talking about the decolonization of the Indian theatre and asking the theatre to go back to the roots. And under that influence, under that clarion call for Indianization of theatre, we have the playwrights like, say, Habib Tanvir. Habib Tanvir is adapting even the Western plays with the help of Indian tradition. For example, Charan Das Chor. Charan Das Chor uses the Chhattisgarhi actors for the performance, and the entire drama is using the folkloric tradition of performance, with full of songs and dances. Even the Pandamini tradition of narrating the story. Okay, narration of story is used in Habib Tanvir's Charan Das Chor. So Habib Tanvir once said that the urban theatre of India, by and large, is imitative in nature. Okay, the urban theatre, according to Habib Tanvir, is urban. Okay, urban theatre is urban because it is imitative, it is Western. So urban theatre in India, by and large, remains imitative. It tries to copy, ape the conventions of the Western theatre. So at its worst, it represents a pale copy of the most worn out tradition. At its best, it reflects new Western forms recently evolved through a rigorous process of experimentation. So I repeat, Habib Tanvir says that urban Indian theatre definitely is Western theatre. It's a theatre based on imitation. The worst form of imitation is that the old worn out plays, these are performed on the stage because of its commercial success. And at its best, it goes on for new innovation through experimentation to produce new types of dramas. So this influence of different forms of drama, in European context also we have different traditions of drama. First there was the Elizabethan and Jacobean tradition of dramaturgy. Gradually after the Restoration, we have the presence of the female actor on the stage, and the development of the Baroque theatre, the proscenium theatre, developed during the Restoration. After the Restoration, we have the neoclassical theatre. Romantic theatre gradually developed from the realistic aesthetic representation of reality within the rectangular painted box of the neoclassical theatre, and replaced that with something supernatural, something mystical. Romantic theatre was born out of this, where we have the poetic dramas, classical poetic dramas presented on the proscenium stage. After that, we have the emergence of the Victorian drama, and towards the last decades of the Victorian period, we have the emergence of a new form of revolt against the convention of drama, the realistic convention of drama, in the form of naturalist play, the well-made play. With Henrik Ibsen's plays, Henrik Ibsen was a Norwegian playwright, and his plays influenced the English playwriting. And under the impact of Henrik Ibsen's plays, we find the development of a new kind of naturalism on the stage. This was also seen in the plays that were produced in the late 19th century in France, Germany, in Spain. In France, new naturalism developed out of naturalism, where a more realistic portrayal of society was possible. Naturalism talked about bringing everything into the frame, not to refine things, not to represent things aesthetically through a process of purification. So theater is not a, a museum, an exhibition of painted faces, painted pictures, of sculptures moving, of, of language that is highly ornamental. Okay, it is not a theater of that kind. So naturalism talked about naturalness of theater, all inclusiveness of theater. So within that rectangular box, almost everything was put inside as if they are natural. So theater became slice of life reality. Life as it is has to be represented on the stage, and this was possible because the writers thought that theater space must produce a kind of environment where the story, it gets absorbed, and the entire story that is produced within the four walls of the stage, okay, four walls of the stage, will keep only one wall open to the audience. One wall open to the audience, so the audience can see whatever is happening within the four walls of the stage, and whatever is happening is natural. In the 1880s, we have a Wagnerian revolution in the field of theater, where music became an integral part of theater, and this music will also contribute to the production of the environment, and the characters who are there are the characters, and we cannot see the actors behind the characters once the play is performed. So everything is presented in an environment. The characters are soaked in the environment, are absorbed in the environment, and then the characters perform their psychological roles. Lighting source became an important aspect of drama, as lighting source was always artificial. In the proscenium theater, lighting source had remained artificial. So lamps were used. Electricity was not there. Before that, candles were used on the theater. Chandeliers were used in the theater. So artificial source of light, that was there. But in naturalism, this artificial source of light should be hidden and turned into natural source of light, in order to represent reality as it. Once the curtain is drawn, what is seen is a rectangular space that resembles life. While in the naturalistic theater, we have three-dimensional stage properties. In the previous theater, neoclassical theater, the Baroque theater, we had painted pictures. The painted pictures are now being replaced by three-dimensional theater props. When we have Antoine, a French practitioner of theater working on new naturalism, he talked about the exact representation of reality on the stage. If a play in real life takes place in 3 hours, 3-hour play should be presented on the stage. So he talked about abandoning the concept of fourth wall. Okay, fourth wall is a wall or a line that separates the actor and the spectator. So when the actors perform on the stage, they are surrounded by 3 walls: the left wing, the right wing, and the back. Okay, backdrop is there. So that the actor is surrounded by 3 walls, and one wall is open. That is called the fourth wall in theater, through which the spectators can see. So Antoine talked about the abolition of the concept of fourth wall, and while rehearsing the plays, he said that I will not tell you which one is the fourth wall. So actors must rehearse in such a way that they are in the setting. They are not outside setting, they are not performing to the spectators. So this also talks about a separation of the actor from the spectators in an artificial manner. So this machinery became richer and richer, and with the coming of photography first, and then the moving image, and finally the cinema, theater faced worse challenges. And in order to overcome the worst challenge, new types of movements in theater, as in painting, started. So painting had that challenge of photography. Similarly, drama had the challenge of cinema. So in order to compete with cinema, that also had the visual advantage of framing the entire narrative, the story, within the visual frame of visual narrative. Drama, therefore, started incorporating new innovations that were seen in painting. So drama became, number one, it came very close to Impressionism. So everything was not stated. Okay, the interplay of colors that was there in the painting the dark and the bright color that will produce a kind of impression on the mind of the spectators, the gray zone in between the dark and the white, bright and the light. That type of theater also developed, but that was a short-lived theater, supplemented by symbolic theater, where theater symbolism. So in cinema, symbolism is possible, but it is restricted. But in theater, a new type of coloration, new type of symbology was used. So there was a tendency also to go back to the past. So with symbolism, we have also the development of expressionism based on the mythic stories, popular stories, larger than life stories. Even the parodistic representation of reality on the stage took place. In Germany, Piscator was working on experiments with the expressionist form of theater. Okay, expressionism in theater became a force. And then we have the development of the teaching plays. The mock trial scenes were done, and such teaching plays in order to educate the masses, educate the factory workers for the cause of revolution. These became the major force or forms of theater. So we have expressionism or expressionist theater as a mode of performance. In the 1926, there also was introduced a new form where the theater started investigating the nature of the human dreams, and in order to present that subliminal zones, okay, the latent zones of the human mind, surrealist theater was produced. Especially the theater of cruelty was produced. Antonin Artaud, the practitioner of theater of cruelty, wrote a book called Theater and Its Double, a collection of essays. And he says that life doubles theater, theater doubles life. So there is no separation between life and theater. And theater is a ritual experience. It's a communal get-together of people experiencing something. That is called theater. So theater is a space where we, the people, come together and exchange some emotional states. And through this communal experience, there is no barrier between the actor and the spectators. Both are combined in the act of performative experience. And the psychological states, especially of madness, of terror, of cruelty, of violence that are ingrained in the subconscious, in the unconscious, these are all exposed to the act of performance. So a kind of surrealist theater was experimented. After Antonin Artaud, we also find the experiments in theater, especially taking place in Germany, and then from Germany to Russia, and from Russia, Germany to America. That type of experiment in theater was called later on as epic theater of Bertolt Brecht. Epic theater of Bertolt Brecht is a dialectical theater for the scientific age, where the contradictions are totally shown in full display of the spectators. Ideas are presented on the stage in a dialectical manner. Thesis, antithesis, both are placed together for the diagnosis. And spectators, each according to his means, each according to his problem, each according to her understanding of the problem, each according to her action, will decide on the course of the synthesis. So nothing is written in the text so as to propagate some idea. Rather, we have a kind of constant engagement of the complex seeing of the audience. And through this engagement of complex seeing of the audience, intellectual theater was born, a form of theater that could be used as an effective weapon as a revolutionary theater. I remember Robert Brustein in the work Theater of Revolt, classifying theater into different types. Number one, the theater of messianic revolt, where we have a character almost resembling the tragic heroes of classical times, taking up arms for himself and for society, for the cause, and struggling against the opposition, struggling against the vices of society. And in that theater, we have a kind of messianic revolt. So this theater of messianic revolt contained a Mashiach who is larger than life character. So in Bernard Shaw's plays, we have, say in Arms and the Man, we have Bluntschli. So in Major Barbara, we have such characters. In Man and Superman, we have such characters. So these characters have some ideas. Say enemy of the people. Dr. Stockman has the idea. that the water is contaminated, and he is trying to teach others about the contamination of the water at the bath, while the people are going to bath because this is a spot where the people get cleansed of their sin, as well as they go there to cure their diseases. So Dr. Stockman finds that a lot of discharge coming from the leather factory is contaminating the water, and because of the sulfur content, temporarily the skin diseases are being cured, but in the long run, these are also causing health concerns and disasters. So he's writing in his own scientific journal, but he becomes the enemy of the people, fighting against the entire tourism industry, fighting against the entire hospitality industry, and the leather industry. So the commercial enterprise is there against this individual, a scientist, and when Satyajit Ray is producing that, it's Ganashotru. It becomes an Indian play. So this can be regarded as a classic example of how the European dramaturgy and European theatre tradition are incorporated in the Indian theatrical tradition. So this is one example. So after Bertolt Brecht's epic theatre, dialectical theatre, the theatre takes a postmodern turn, especially in the hands of Peter Brook and Georgi Grotowski, more experimental in nature. And by this time, as communication technologies have improved, theaters across the world came together. All around the world, theaters came together, and there was a collaborative approach in the field of theater. So in the modern period, when Badal Sarkar is talking about the third theater, there are the concepts that are emerging from Brazil, Latin American countries, Augusta Boal's theater, even Grotowski, Polish writer Grotowski's, his theater concept, poor theater, all these concepts are coming together in the making and shaping of the Indian theater as a whole. In the European concept, the development evolution, we have stagecraft, acting technique, theories of performances, theatrical innovations, even playwright technique, different aspects of stage mechanisms, and all these are definitely incorporated by the theater movements in India. So innovations in Europe or America become a part and parcel of such innovations in India. Indian theater, however, has remained a theater that is well made. A theater cannot much experiment with the form, although it has tried to introduce all the relevant, significant, contemporary socio-political, economic issues in the post-independence period. There was no urge to liberate theater, either from the tyranny of the Western theater tradition, neither was there any urge to keep theater in a pure form. So purity of theater is not a hallmark of Indian theater. So none of Indian practitioners regarded this theater practice as something sacred. So they were all progressive writers. The writers whom I mentioned, they were all progressive writers, and through the theater, through their works, they have expressed their concerns that are definitely progressive, scientific, theatrical. They were not much bothered with the call for theater of roots, especially for the purity of theater. So there are some networking issues today again. Yeah, are you? Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes,
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 you're
sir.
audible.
Yes, sir.
I'm
it's
audible.
clear. Yes, sir,
Okay.
yes.
The modern Indian drama, as I said earlier, came under the impact of the European theatre tradition. So with the emergence of new playwrights like Mahesh Dattani, popularization of Indian productions like Charan Das Chor abroad, drama criticism has also gained popularity in India, and several researches that are taking place. We have excellent books on Indian dramaturgy and theatre tradition nowadays, especially writers like Rakesh Solomon, Rustum Barocha, Nandi Bhatia, Vasudha Dalmia, Arpana Dhawarkar. All these great writers have, critics have really contributed a lot to the understanding of theatre. I must here refer to Richard Schechner's work. Richard Schechner's work, Means of Performance. Okay, Means of Performance, the work that talks about the tradition of theatre from the ritual to Ramlila. And there Richard Schechner talks about the presence of Indian theatrical tradition in the evolution of the modern Indian drama. Although we have seen, yes, in Natak tradition, Sangeet and Nataka tradition, in say Nautanki or say Tamasha, modern day Tamasha, we have the continuation of the Indian theatrical tradition from ritual to modern theatrical experience. Even in Marathi theatre, we have seen that the tradition of Tamasha is more dominant than the tradition of Western theatre. But the Parsi theatre tradition, of course, is there in the formation of the theatre. Vijay Tendulkar's Silence the Court is in Session is a different type of theatre, because this theatre is more Western. It is not theatre that is like the Tamasha. Although Datta Bhagat's plays like Whirlpool, Datta Bhagat is again a Marathi playwright, a Dalit playwright. His plays are more steeped in the Indian theatrical tradition. He's also writing naturalistic plays, okay, meant for drawing room plays, naturalistic plays, well-made plays. I say that most of the successful Indian plays are definitely well-made plays. All the experiments are done, and conventions, conceptions, form, structure, these are all experimented with in various levels. So through this analysis, a short historiography of the development of contemporary Indian drama, we have come to not even a clear-cut understanding, okay, but an understanding of the evolution of the Indian theatre. Every theatre writer writes under some kind of burden. The burden is that to make the play successful. And in order to make successful, it has to connect with the audience. In order to connect with the audience, time-tested dramaturgical methods, theatrical methods are introduced. So these time-tested methods sometimes corrupt the content and the structure of the framework of the play. So from 1947 onward, we have seen this as a mark. So even when they are adapting the historical plays, historical subject, say Aurangzeb story or Tughlaq stories, Girish Karnad wrote a play called Tughlaq. They are much more inclined to represent the Tughlaq story vis-a-vis the prism of the Western dramaturgy. Or Indra Parthasarthi's Aurangzeb, that is also steeped in the legacy of the Western theatre. So the valorization of nationalist movement and the emergent socio-political concerns, especially the emergence of the middle class and the problems of the working class in India, the emergent socio-political problems, especially after the 1962, the Sino-India conflict, opened the eyes of the Indians to the task of nation building and solving the process of the problems of the land. And this, in turn, contributed to a turn in the Indian history, especially the theatre history. The turbulence of the late 60s also found some expression. And with the emergency came the last stroke on the development of drama. And under the years of emergency, the theatre definitely did not exist for that period of time. The left-wing intellectuals and progressive movements got a revolutionary impetus. And new playwrights, the playwrights whom I mentioned, these are the playwrights of the 1970s, except Dattani, of course. Dattani is a playwright of the 90s. So most of the playwrights whom I mentioned earlier, like Badal Sarkar, Utpal Datto, Vijay Tendulkar, Habib Tanveer, Mohan Rakesh, Girish Karnad, they started their career in the 70s, and their spirit perpetuated through these successive decades, so up to 1990s, till the neoliberal policies of the government came. And then again, the commercial success of the theatre determined the content, subject matter of the theatre. So 1960s, 70s onward, we have a type of theatre that is more experimental, that is written against the grain and more revolutionary. Rustam Barucha, in his book Theatres of Revolution, talks about this new emerging theater of the 70s that created some kind of innovation and shake the traditional foundation of the traditional Western theater in India. New generation of the playwrights, they started challenging the foundations of ideological state apparatus. They even seized the streets and every available performance space. They cherished the idealistic visions of better future. And the profusion of philosophy, art, literature, even the theories came into practice in theater. Theories like post-structuralism, feminism, post-colonialism, gender studies, all these dismantled the traditional way of perception, logic and reason. The generation that made the theater successful in the 60s in India or 70s in India gradually left the theater after the 90s. And 1990s saw the decadence of theater, the invasion of theater by media culture, the TV culture, and in the 2020s we have the invasion of the theater by the YouTube culture, okay, or the internet ICT culture. So even globalization, multinational, but this has also given us a scope to watch and witness the experiments in theater that are taking place. It has also introduced us to a concept of a melting pot to dissipate cultural, racial, sexual, gender, ethnic, religious identities. But the radical agenda that was there in the 1970s to write plays against the grain was gradually replaced by a kind of conformist agenda of the 1990s with the emergence of the new liberal policies of the government. In the 70s, however, the society was passing through a fervent and transitional phase. Political, cultural, linguistic, regional, even the caste gender issues, they all challenge the dominant mainstream Indianism. And even in modern day, we find that the emergence of alternative theaters, especially the street theaters, the Dalit theaters, they are challenging the dominant mainstream Indianism or nationalism. They also developed a tendency to liberate drama from the constraints of the melodramatic, tear-jerking, popular plays, as well as a tendency to liberate theatre from the naturalist, Ibsenian or Savian, Bernard Shaw theatre. Political repression, urban violence, street demonstration, turbulent images witnessed on the streets gradually are becoming a part and parcel of the theatrical experience. There are several regional groups in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, Bangalore, Delhi that are now creating a kind of space for their own in this radical resistance theater, theater of protest, theater of political movements. So India is a society, a great stage of significant social activities nowadays. And theater is not dislocated from this mainstream tradition. Theater is, of course, Indian theater is, of course, diverse, pluralistic, of course, assimilative, and even contradictory. There are so many types of theaters coexisting together. So we cannot just pinpoint that this is the mainstream Indian theater tradition. With the rise of the amateur and the group theaters, theater tended to liberate itself from the constraints of the box office and acceptability of theatrical conservatism, whereas the commercial theater tolerated social criticism and freedom of expression as long as it maintained the status quo of the bourgeois and administrative expectations. The alternative group theaters became a platform for rehearsing counterculture and revolutionary politics. New activist group theaters like Shambhu Mitra's Bahurupi, Rudra Prasad Sengupta's Nandikar, even Ashok Mukhopadhyay's theater workshop, Badal Sarkar Shatabdi, Usha Ganguly's Rangokormi, Ibrahim Alkaji's NST Repertory Theatre, Vijay Mehta's Rangayan Mumbai Theatre, Arvind and Sulabha Deshpande's Avishkar, again centered around Mumbai, Padmashi's theatre group, Alak Padmashi's theatre group Mumbai, Prithvi Theatre, you have heard the name of Prithvi Theatre, Playpen, Performing Arts Group Bangalore. So all these groups demanded revolutionary approaches to playwriting, performance and production. Proscenium theatre somehow proved inadequate and Indian drama also broke out into the alternative spaces like parks, schools, streets, experimental methods of playwriting through workshop and rehearsals brought a radical change as seen in the works of the groups Sardar Hazmi's say Janam, that group, or Bahadur Sarkar's Shatabdi. Transformational acting was used, orchestrated acting, stage exercise, improvisational performances. All this gave new direction to such street performances. So the impact of European drama can also be seen in the avant-garde theatre that developed in India and in the innovative use of costume, lighting equipment, sound, music, acting space. Drama reflects the relationship between human culture, social, and political structures. And with this analysis of the impact of the Western drama and the making of Indian drama, I shall be concluding this lecture today. If you have any questions, you can ask. Thank you very much. I stop recording now.